how you define an Islamic approach. The Islamic approach means that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said and what His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said are at the center of how, not just how to act, but how to perceive things, how to define the reality, how to define history. And therefore, Islam is not just about the deen versus the dunya. Islam is about everything. قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين. Everything is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My life and my death. And my life includes many things that we talked about today. Thank you, sir. Sure. So my life includes everything that we talked about that has to do with life. Therefore, this approach is not just about the deen versus the dunya. We have to be very careful with this because the secular approach to Islam is one of the remnants of colonization. That colonization could not take Islam totally out of people's lives, but it could take Islam out of most of the lives. And what do they really insist on? Then the ibadat, they want their mosques. So basically, Christianized Islam. They want their mosques, they want their marriages, they want this, and okay, then leave their marriages and divorces for them within Islam, and leave their mosques and their Hajj and their Umrah and so on within Islam. They want to do the biha on the day of Eid, that is fine, just regulate that, and so forth. But that's it. The rest is going to be secular. And that is a problem that we are still living in. Many of us still define an Islamic education versus a non-Islamic education, a professional education. And I want to study Islam, I will study this. But I want to study engineering, then no, it has nothing to do with Islam. I want to study management, has nothing to do with Islam. Even though a lot of what you do as an engineer has to do with Islam. They studied over there under ethics. Islam is wider than that. Islam is ethics and design and many other things. Because design is not value-free. When you design something as an engineer, a building or a car or a mall, that is not value-free. That is full of value and philosophy and rules and, you see, and when you, and so forth. But actually, the problem with secular thinking is not just colonization. Secular thinking started, in my view, early in the Islamic history, when the ulama of Islam were not allowed to participate in the public affairs. When the Khilafah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam changed into a kingdom, and eventually, maybe not from the beginning, it started a bit smooth and gradual, but in any case, eventually, the Khilafah became an empire, and therefore the Khalifa is a Caesar, is somebody that you cannot really touch. And the Imams of Islam, all of them, went to prison for one reason or the other, because of that king. Many of them went to prison because they refused to be judges. They refused to be judges not because they're not qualified. Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, Imam Shafi'i, for that matter, he went to prison for that same reason. They didn't want to be judges because they didn't want to be part of a corrupt system. At that time, eventually, when the kingdom became un-Islamic from the Islamic point of view, many of the ulama of Islam decided that the alim should not enter the palace of the Emir. And some of the ulama who worked in the palaces of the Umara, the other ulama did not take the narration seriously and did not take their fatwa seriously, except for a few exceptions. But Abu Yusuf became a qadi. Abu Hanifa died in prison because he did not want to become a qadi. But Abu Yusuf judged that it is best to be part of the system and try to serve Islam through that. And he said before he died that he tried as a qadi never to give anybody a right that they don't deserve and to take the right, etc. But Abu Yusuf had a ceiling. He could take from the emir of the time, or the prince of the time, a piece of land or a cattle or something, but he could not ask the prince of the time, why didn't you do shura when you appointed your son? Or why didn't you, well, how come you're building, Allahu Akbar, how come you're building, we'll take a few minutes inshallah. How come you're building a palace for yourself from the public money? And this is mal al-ummah. This is not mal for you. You deserve a salary, right? That's Islam. And so forth. So basically, the secular thinking is deeper than colonialism because it started with the marginalization of the ulama from the public affairs and the banning of them participating in the decision making, the real decision making, and so forth, even though some of them became qadis and so forth. The maqasid approach, to give you a few quick notes, is an approach that looks for the purpose of the revelation. When you read the revelation, there is nothing in the book of Allah that does not have a why in it. Because the book of Allah is full of hikmah, wisdom. It's not, there is no talk that doesn't have a why, even the whys that we don't understand. Alif, Lam, Mim, Ha, Mim, Yasin, Ain, Sin, Qaf. We don't understand, but there is a why behind it. And there is nothing that the Prophet ﷺ has said that does not have a wisdom behind it. There is a murad, there is a maqsid, there is a hadaf. That maqsid is at the core of the logic of the revelation. And that is not criteria number 2 here. So criteria number 1, that the revelation is central in your action and your perception. And number 2, that the maqasid is central in your reading of the revelation. And that is the maqasid approach. So the maqasid approach says that we are going to go back to the revelation. Of course, we will learn from all the scholars who dealt with the revelation too. We're not going to cut ourselves from our history and our literature and our fiqh and our tafsir and hadith and usul and da'wah. These are Islamic sciences too, of course. But we are not going to divide the Islamic versus non-Islamic sciences in the colonial way. We're going to integrate. We're going to integrate da'wah with communication. We're going to integrate fiqh with policy and so forth. We're going to integrate tafsir with linguistics and society and so forth. So it's not just a matter of a science that is cut from the rest of the sciences, but integrated. Now, if you approach it through the maqasid approach, by definition, you are doing a futuristic approach, because the maqasid is in the future, pulling the current times towards it. This is I'm thinking about justice. Oh, thinking about the future. How can I achieve justice on earth? The maqasid approach is also a critical approach, because once you ask why, you are criticizing what you are asking why about. Why the law? Why the policy? Why the assignment? You are criticizing my assignment if you tell me, why are you asking us to write about such and such? That is a critical approach. The maqasid approach is also a holistic approach, because the why of anything, why of our college here, why of a country like South Africa, why do we have that? The why is about the holistic picture, is about the direction of the whole body. It's not about one of the parts. Why the computer here in front of me is not about one of the buttons or one of the programs. It's about the holistic picture of the computer. What is the function of this? That is holism. Maqasid approach is also a practical approach, because the why approach opens the action for you. Why am I doing this? There's some action, there is some reaction that I have to take when I ask why. And why, as we mentioned, is a multidisciplinary approach, because when I ask why, I don't care whether your answer is economics or politics or literature or whatever. Your answer could be any of these things, whatever the reason is. And therefore, it is, as we mentioned here, a paradigm shifting approach in the sense that we are shifting our central reference to the revelation, and then we are shifting our interpretation of the revelation to the maqasidi approach, to the objective-oriented, purpose-oriented, ends-oriented approach when we deal with the revelation. So, therefore, the questions that are mentioned here, that the maqasid did not bring anything new, the maqasid is not academic, the maqasid is loose or complicated or nobody knows about it, it doesn't have, I don't know how many hits on the internet. Like all of these questions become side questions really. They are not at the core of what we are trying to do. What we are trying to do is not about breaking loose from any of the rules of Islam, and it is not about bringing complications that are unneeded to any of the questions, but to bring complications that are much needed and are essential of the understanding of the questions. And yes, it brings new thinking and new information. And if you start to follow the maqasid studies or this kind of approach, you will find thousands of recent books and researches and all that, where people are trying to look at the higher principles of Islam in order to answer new questions. Because really the new questions cannot be answered efficiently without looking at the values and the higher principles and the holistic approach of Islam. And whether it's unknown or